What happens when privilege meets prejudice at 40,000 feet above ground level? At Denver International Airport's most exclusive private jet lounge, a quiet woman in simple clothes approaches the reception desk with a boarding pass in hand. Instead of the courtesy reserved for elite travelers, she receives suspicion, scrutiny, and ultimately, public humiliation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But this is no ordinary passenger seeking access to luxury amenities. Behind the unassuming exterior and modest attire stands Marion Blackwell, a name that appears on corporate boards, government advisory panels, and the Forbes billionaire list. She owns the very infrastructure that powers this airport's operations, yet no one in that gleaming lounge has any idea who she really is. Why did a seasoned lounge manager risk everything to publicly eject a paying customer? What systemic failures allowed such blatant discrimination to flourish in America's most regulated industry? And how does one woman's quiet dignity become the catalyst for sweeping changes that shake an entire airport authority to its core? This story transcends a simple case of mistaken identity. It exposes the invisible barriers that persist in our most elite spaces, the assumptions made about who belongs where, and the dangerous comfort that comes with unchecked authority. It reveals what happens when those who are underestimated refuse to remain silent, and how justice can arrive not through anger or retaliation, but through the precise application of power by those who truly understand its weight. The morning mist clung to the Colorado Rockies as Denver International Airport hummed with its usual controlled chaos. Business travelers clutched coffee cups and tablets, families juggled strollers and carry-on bags, and the PA system echoed with flight announcements in 3 languages. Gate concourses stretched like mechanical arteries pumping life through the massive terminal complex. High above the main terminal, tucked behind unmarked elevators and security checkpoints, the Platinum Executive Lounge occupied an entire floor of the airport's most exclusive wing. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the Rocky Mountain foothills, while inside, leather furniture and marble surfaces created an atmosphere of refined luxury. This wasn't just a waiting area, it was a sanctuary for those whose net worth exceeded the GDP of small nations. The lounge operated under strict access protocols. Private jet passengers, Fortune 500 executives, and select members of the airport's elite program enjoyed amenities that most travelers never knew existed. Dedicated concierge services, private dining rooms, shower facilities, and direct access to the tarmac where corporate jets waited like sleeping giants. Marion Blackwell stepped off the elevator at precisely 8:47 a.m., her presence as understated as her appearance. She wore dark jeans that had seen better days, a plain gray sweater with a small pulled thread near the left shoulder, and comfortable walking shoes that looked like they'd covered many miles. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she carried a worn leather messenger bag that had the patina of years of use. No jewelry adorned her hands or neck. No designer labels announced her status. She looked like someone who might be visiting Denver for a teaching conference or a family reunion. What set her apart wasn't visible to the casual observer. Her posture carried the subtle confidence of someone accustomed to command, and her eyes moved with the calculating precision of a person who noticed details others missed. She walked with purpose but without haste, as though time bent slightly to accommodate her schedule rather than the other way around. The lounge's reception area featured a marble desk that stretched 12 feet across, staffed by 2 impeccably dressed attendants. Behind them, a digital display showed departure times for private aircraft, each entry representing millions of dollars in transportation costs. The morning shift had just begun, and the staff moved through their opening routines with the precision of luxury hospitality professionals. Rebecca Morrison stood behind the reception desk, her blonde hair arranged in a style that had required 45 minutes and significant product to achieve. Her navy blue blazer bore the airport authority's golden logo, and her posture suggested someone who took great pride in gatekeeping access to exclusive spaces. She had worked at the lounge for 6 years, earning recognition for her attention to detail and her ability to distinguish between legitimate elite travelers and those who might be attempting to gain unauthorized access. Beside her, James Crawford organized boarding passes and checked his tablet for the morning's private flight manifest. He had started at the lounge 3 months earlier, fresh from hospitality school, eager to build a career in luxury service management. His enthusiasm sometimes clashed with Rebecca's more seasoned skepticism about unconventional passengers. Marion approached the desk with her boarding pass already in hand. The document indicated a departure time of 9:15 a.m. aboard a Gulfstream G650, destination San Francisco International Airport. The aircraft tail number corresponded to one of the most expensive private jets currently at Denver International, a machine worth approximately $60 million. "Good morning," Marion said, her voice carrying the neutral politeness of someone conducting routine business. "I'd like to access the lounge before my departure." Rebecca's eyes immediately began their trained assessment. She noted the passenger's casual attire, the absence of obvious wealth indicators, and the boarding pass for one of the morning's most expensive flights. Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly from professional courtesy to professional suspicion. "May I see your boarding pass and identification, please?" Rebecca's tone remained polite, but carried an undertone that suggested she expected to find something amiss. Marion placed both documents on the marble surface. Her Colorado driver's license showed an address in Cherry Hills Village, one of Denver's most affluent neighborhoods, though the photo had been taken several years earlier when her hair was shorter. The boarding pass bore her name in clear letters, M. Blackwell. Rebecca examined both documents with theatrical thoroughness, holding them up to the light as though checking for forgeries. She typed something into her computer terminal, her fingers moving with the slow deliberation of someone hoping to discover a problem. "I'm showing some irregularities with this booking," Rebecca announced, though her screen displayed nothing unusual. "What kind of irregularities?" Marion asked, her tone remaining level. "The passenger manifest shows this flight was booked under a corporate account, but you don't appear to be dressed for business travel." Rebecca's words carried the weight of someone accustomed to making judgments about who belonged in elite spaces. James shifted uncomfortably beside his colleague. The boarding pass appeared legitimate, and the computer system showed no red flags or security concerns. The passenger stood calmly waiting, showing none of the defensive behavior that typically accompanied illegitimate access attempts. "Corporate accounts can be used for personal travel," Marion replied evenly. "Many companies provide that benefit to their executives." "Which company do you work for?" Rebecca pressed, her interrogation becoming more pointed. "Blackwell Industries." Rebecca's fingers moved across her keyboard again, this time with genuine purpose. A few clicks brought up the corporate account information for Blackwell Industries, showing a massive transportation budget and platinum-level service agreements with multiple airports across the country. The account history revealed regular bookings for private jets, helicopter transfers, and premium ground transportation services. Yet, instead of satisfaction, Rebecca's expression showed increased skepticism. She had never heard of Blackwell Industries, despite its apparent wealth, and the disconnect between the company's obvious resources and its representative's modest appearance deepened her suspicions. "I'll need to verify this booking with our management," Rebecca declared, reaching for her phone. "That seems unnecessary," Marion observed. "The documents are valid, and your system confirms the booking." "Our policy requires additional verification for certain situations," Rebecca replied, though no such policy existed in the lounge's standard operating procedures. While Rebecca made her call, Marion glanced around the reception area. She noticed the subtle security cameras positioned to monitor the desk interaction, the quality of the marble flooring, and the positioning of the luxury seating area beyond the reception checkpoint. Her eyes cataloged details with the precision of someone who understood both architecture and operations management. James continued to review the boarding pass and identification, finding no legitimate grounds for denying access. The documents were valid, the flight was real, and the passenger displayed none of the behaviors that would typically raise security concerns. His discomfort with the situation grew, as Rebecca's phone conversation stretched beyond what seemed reasonable. "Sir," Rebecca said into her phone, "I have a passenger here who claims to be flying on the Gulfstream G650 departing at 9:15. The booking appears legitimate, but something doesn't seem right about the situation." She paused, listening to the response, then continued. "The passenger is dressed very casually, not like our typical private jet clientele. I'm concerned this might be some kind of mistake or attempted unauthorized access." Marion remained perfectly still during this conversation, though her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She had encountered similar situations before, moments when her appearance failed to match assumptions about wealth and power. Usually, she chose to educate rather than escalate, but the public nature of this interrogation was testing her patience. The phone conversation concluded, and Rebecca returned to the desk with an expression of vindicated authority. "Our operations manager is coming down to resolve this situation," she announced. "Please have a seat over there while we sort this out." She gestured toward a small seating area separate from the main lounge, effectively quarantining Marion from the premium amenities she had legitimate access to use. "I prefer to stand," Marion replied calmly. "It would be better if you sat down," Rebecca insisted, her tone becoming more directive than suggestive. James intervened gently. "Ma'am, if the documents check out, perhaps we could." "James," Rebecca cut him off sharply, "let me handle this situation." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The reception area fell into an uncomfortable silence broken only by the soft hum of climate control systems and the distant sounds of the main terminal far below. Other passengers began arriving for morning departures, their interactions with the staff flowing smoothly as their appearances aligned with expectations about private jet travelers. A woman in an expensive suit and diamond jewelry was waved through without any document verification beyond a casual glance at her boarding pass. A man in a custom-tailored business suit received a warm greeting and immediate access to the lounge amenities. The contrast between their treatment and Marion's experience was stark and unmistakable. Marion observed these interactions without comment, but her mental catalog of discriminatory practices grew with each passing minute. She understood that what was happening to her was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of assumptions and biases that had become normalized within the airport's most exclusive spaces. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The operations manager had not appeared, and Rebecca showed no signs of urgency about resolving the situation. Instead, she seemed content to let Marion wait indefinitely while processing other passengers with practiced efficiency. At 9:03 a.m., with 12 minutes until her scheduled departure, Marion finally spoke again. "I'd like to speak with your supervisor immediately." "The operations manager is the supervisor on duty, and he's dealing with this situation," Rebecca replied dismissively. "Then I'd like his name and direct contact information." "That's not information we provide to passengers." The exchange was growing tense, though Marion's voice remained controlled and professional. She understood the power dynamics at play. Rebecca felt secure in her authority to deny access, confident that her judgment would be supported by management regardless of the circumstances. What Rebecca didn't understand was that she was not just detaining a passenger. She was systematically humiliating the person whose investment portfolio included the bonds that financed the airport's expansion, whose companies provided the technology that powered the lounge's reservation systems, and whose influence extended far beyond what anyone in that marble-lined room could imagine. The morning sun climbed higher over the Colorado landscape, casting long shadows across the tarmac where Marion's aircraft waited. Inside the Platinum Executive Lounge, time moved slowly, as one woman's quiet dignity faced off against institutional prejudice, setting the stage for consequences that would reshape not just this exclusive space, but the entire airport authority that governed it. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, revealing Thomas Hendricks, the Platinum Executive Lounge operations manager. He stepped into the reception area with the measured confidence of someone who had built his career on managing delicate situations involving high-net-worth individuals. His silver hair was meticulously styled, his charcoal suit pressed to perfection, and his expression carried the practiced neutrality of luxury hospitality management. At 53, Thomas had overseen VIP services at 3 major airports before accepting his current position at Denver International. He prided himself on his ability to read people, to distinguish between legitimate elite travelers and those who might be attempting to access restricted areas through fraud or confusion. His reputation within the airport authority rested on maintaining the exclusivity that made the Platinum Executive Lounge profitable. "Good morning," Thomas said, his voice carrying the warm authority that had made him successful in luxury service management. "I understand there's been some confusion about lounge access." Rebecca immediately launched into her explanation. This passenger presented documentation for the 9:15 Gulfstream departure, but something doesn't add up. The corporate account shows significant activity. but the passenger's appearance doesn't match our typical private jet clientele profile. Thomas examined Marion with the practiced eye of someone trained to assess wealth and status through subtle indicators. He noted her casual attire, the absence of expensive accessories, and her calm demeanor despite the prolonged delay. His initial assessment aligned with Rebecca's concerns. This didn't look like someone who belonged in spaces reserved for the ultra-wealthy. "May I review your documentation again?" Thomas asked, extending his hand toward Marion. She handed over her identification and boarding pass without complaint, though her patience was wearing thin as precious departure minutes continued to tick away. The documents passed between Thomas's fingers like evidence in a criminal investigation, subjected to scrutiny that far exceeded standard verification procedures. "Miss Blackwell," Thomas began, "I'm sure you understand that we maintain very strict security protocols for this facility. The Platinum Executive Lounge serves passengers whose safety and privacy requirements are quite sensitive." "I understand completely," Marion replied, "which is why I expected the verification process to be both thorough and efficient." Thomas caught the subtle edge in her voice, not anger but the quiet impatience of someone accustomed to professional competence. He had heard similar tones from CEO-level passengers who tolerated inefficiency poorly, though usually those passengers arrived in clothing that announced their status more clearly. "The Blackwell Industries account shows regular private aviation activity," Thomas continued, consulting his tablet. "However, I don't see your name on our previous passenger manifest. Is this your first time using this particular service?" "No," Marion answered simply, offering no elaboration. Her brevity frustrated Thomas, who was accustomed to passengers providing detailed explanations about their travel purposes, business relationships, and corporate affiliations. Elite travelers typically enjoy discussing their importance and connections. This woman's reticence struck him as suspicious rather than dignified. James watched the interaction with growing discomfort. The passenger had provided valid documentation, maintained professional composure, and answered every question posed to her. Yet the interrogation continued, driven by assumptions about how wealthy people should look and behave. "Could you tell me about your role with Blackwell Industries?" Thomas pressed. "It would help us verify your authorization to use the corporate travel account." Marion paused before responding, a flicker of something. Amusement? Irritation? Crossing her features. "I handle strategic oversight for the company's operations." The vague description only deepened Thomas's suspicions. In his experience, legitimate corporate executives were eager to discuss their titles, responsibilities, and achievements. This woman's reluctance to elaborate suggested someone who might be using borrowed or fraudulent credentials. "Strategic oversight covers a broad range of responsibilities," Thomas observed. "Could you be more specific about your position within the company hierarchy?" "I could be," Marion replied, "but I'm not sure why that's relevant to accessing a lounge I'm authorized to use." Quote, her response carried a subtle challenge that made both Thomas and Rebecca stiffen. They were accustomed to deference from passengers, even wealthy ones who understood that cooperation ensured smooth service. This woman's quiet resistance to their authority felt inappropriate and concerning. Meanwhile, other passengers continued arriving and departing from the lounge without incident. A tech entrepreneur in designer jeans and a cashmere hoodie was greeted warmly and escorted immediately to the premium seating area. A real estate mogul wearing golf attire received a personal welcome from Thomas himself, complete with inquiries about his recent tournament performance. The contrast was not lost on Marion, who filed each interaction away in her mental archive of discriminatory practices. She understood that what was happening to her was not about security protocols or standard verification procedures. It was about assumptions: who belonged in elite spaces, who deserved respect and courtesy, and who could be subjected to scrutiny without consequence. "Ma'am," Rebecca interjected, consulting her computer screen, "I'm showing that the Gulfstream G650 you're scheduled to board is one of our most expensive aircraft options. The daily charter rate exceeds $40,000. She delivered this information as though it were evidence of fraud, implying that someone of Marion's appearance couldn't possibly afford such luxury transportation. The accusation hung in the air like smoke, insulting without being explicitly stated. "Yes," Marion confirmed calmly, "private aviation costs are substantial." "And Blackwell Industries regularly books flights at this expense level?" Thomas asked, his tone suggesting disbelief. The company's transportation budget reflects its operational requirements, Marion answered diplomatically. Her refusal to be intimidated by financial scrutiny frustrated both staff members. They had expected her to become defensive, to provide detailed explanations about corporate expense policies, or to produce additional documentation proving her worthiness. Instead, she maintained the composed confidence of someone who had never needed to justify her presence in elite spaces. At 9:08 a.m., 7 minutes before her scheduled departure, Marion finally addressed the delay directly. "I appreciate your diligence with security procedures, but my departure time is approaching. If there are specific concerns about my documentation, I'd prefer to resolve them quickly." "The documentation appears to be in order," James offered quietly, earning a sharp look from Rebecca. "However," Thomas continued, "we've encountered some irregularities that require additional verification. I'll need to contact Blackwell Industries directly to confirm your authorization to use their corporate travel account." "That seems excessive," Marion observed, though her tone remained level. "It's standard procedure for certain situations," Thomas replied, echoing Rebecca's earlier fabrication about non-existent policies. What they didn't realize was that calling Blackwell Industries would connect them to an automated system that would eventually route to Marion's own office, where her assistant would need to confirm details about a boss who was currently standing in an airport lounge being interrogated by people who had no idea they were questioning the company's founder and CEO. "Fine," Marion said simply. "Make your call." Her acquiescence surprised them. They had expected resistance, argument, or the kind of emotional response that would justify their suspicions. Instead, she seemed almost amused by their intention to verify her identity with herself. Thomas stepped away from the reception desk to make the call, leaving Rebecca and James to monitor the passenger they had essentially detained. The minutes continued to tick away as Thomas navigated Blackwell Industries' phone system, leaving increasingly frustrated messages with various departments that seemed unable to immediately confirm the travel authorization for someone named M. Blackwell. During the extended phone process, Marion observed the lounge's operations with the analytical eye of someone who understood both hospitality management and discrimination litigation. She noted the absence of written policies posted anywhere in the reception area, the inconsistent application of verification procedures, and the clear disparities in how different passengers were treated based on appearance rather than documentation. Her messenger bag contained items that would have immediately resolved the situation: business cards identifying her as Blackwell Industries' founder, platinum credit cards with unlimited spending limits, and contact information for board members at a dozen major corporations. Yet she chose not to produce these items, curious to see how far the discrimination would extend. A part of her, the part that had built a multi-billion-dollar company from nothing, was genuinely fascinated by the psychology of institutional bias. These people were so confident in their assumptions about her that they were willing to detain a legitimate passenger rather than acknowledge they might be wrong. It was a masterclass in how prejudice operated in spaces designed to exclude rather than include. At 9:12 a.m., 3 minutes before her scheduled departure, Thomas returned from his phone calls with an expression of frustrated confusion. "I've been unable to reach anyone at Blackwell Industries who can immediately confirm your travel authorization," he announced. "Given the security concerns and the irregular nature of this situation, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the lounge." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Rebecca smiled slightly, vindicated in her initial suspicions. James looked deeply uncomfortable but said nothing. And Marion Blackwell, founder of a company worth $12 billion, owner of the bonds that financed this airport's construction, and one of the most influential business leaders in Colorado, simply nodded. "I see," she said quietly. "You can wait in the main terminal for your departure," Thomas continued, "but access to the Platinum Executive Lounge is restricted to verified passengers only." "And you don't consider me verified?" "Not at this time, no." Marion looked around the reception area one final time, her gaze cataloging every detail of the marble surfaces, security cameras, and luxury amenities that surrounded them. Her expression remained serene, but something in her eyes suggested that this moment would not be forgotten or forgiven. "Thank you for your time," she said simply, then turned and walked toward the elevator. As the doors closed behind her, Thomas felt a moment of uncertainty. The passenger had accepted the rejection with unusual grace, showing none of the outrage or threats of legal action that typically accompanied such decisions. Her composure was almost unsettling, as though she possessed information or resources that made their authority irrelevant. But the feeling passed quickly, replaced by professional satisfaction. He had protected the lounge's exclusivity, maintained security protocols, and prevented what could have been an embarrassing situation if an unauthorized person had gained access to sensitive areas. What Thomas didn't realize was that he had just made the most expensive mistake of his career, setting in motion a series of consequences that would destroy not just his own position, but the careers of everyone who had participated in the systematic humiliation of a woman whose quiet dignity masked power beyond their imagination. The elevator descended toward the main terminal, carrying with it the seeds of an institutional reckoning that would reshape Denver International Airport forever. The main terminal of Denver International Airport stretched before Marion like a canyon of glass and steel, filled with the constant motion of travelers navigating toward their destinations. The contrast between the marble luxury of the Platinum Executive Lounge and the functional efficiency of the public spaces was jarring, though not unfamiliar to someone who had experienced both worlds throughout her life. Marion found a seat near gate B23, close enough to monitor the departure area for private aircraft, but far enough from the lounge to avoid any additional confrontation with security personnel. She opened her worn leather messenger bag and withdrew a tablet, its screen reflecting her calm expression as she began documenting the morning's events with the precision of someone who understood that details mattered in litigation. Her fingers moved across the digital keyboard with practiced efficiency, recording timestamps, names, specific quotes, and behavioral observations. This wasn't emotional journaling, it was evidence collection. Every discriminatory comment, every procedural deviation, and every moment of differential treatment became part of a growing legal record that would soon become very expensive for Denver International Airport. While Marion worked, her phone buzzed with messages from her assistant, Sandra Martinez, wondering about her delayed arrival in San Francisco. A board meeting was scheduled for 11:30 a.m. Pacific time, and several major investors were flying in specifically to meet with her about a new renewable energy initiative. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was sitting in a public terminal after being denied access to luxury amenities that her own investments had helped finance. At 9:15 a.m., her scheduled departure time came and went. Through the massive windows overlooking the tarmac, she could see the Gulfstream G650 sitting idle, its crew presumably wondering where their passenger had disappeared. The aircraft represented a $40,000 daily expense that was now accumulating costs while she sat documenting discrimination in the general population seating area. Her phone rang, displaying the number for Apex Aviation Services, the company that managed her private jet fleet. The call was from Captain David Reynolds, a veteran pilot who had flown for Marion's company for 8 years. "Ms. Blackwell, we're showing you as a no-show for this morning's departure. Is everything all right?" "There's been a situation with lounge access," Marion replied calmly. "I'm currently in the main terminal documenting some irregularities with airport services." Captain Reynolds knew better than to ask detailed questions when his employer used that particular tone. In their years of working together, he had learned that Marion Blackwell's quiet voice often preceded significant corporate upheavals. "Should we delay departure or arrange alternative transportation?" he asked. "Delay for now. I'll have updated instructions within the hour." After ending the call, Marion returned to her documentation, but her attention was soon captured by a commotion near the security checkpoint. A young black family, parents with 2 small children, was being subjected to additional screening procedures that seemed excessive compared to other passengers moving through the same lines. The parents answered question after question about their travel purpose, destination, and luggage contents, while their tired children fidgeted in the fluorescent lighting. Other travelers passed through screening with minimal interaction, but this family faced the kind of scrutiny that Marion had just experienced in the executive lounge, scaled down to the TSA checkpoint level. She watched as the father, a man in his 30s wearing a business suit, maintained patient politeness while security agents examined every item in their carry-on bags. His wife held their toddler while explaining repeatedly that they were traveling to a family wedding in California. The differential treatment was subtle enough to avoid obvious discrimination claims, but clear enough to anyone who understood systemic bias. Marion made additional notes on her tablet, recognizing a pattern that extended far beyond her own experience. The airport's discrimination wasn't limited to executive services. It was embedded throughout the operational culture, manifesting at every level from security checkpoints to premium amenities. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Marcus Chen, the chief operating officer of Blackwell Industries. Marcus had been with the company for 12 years, rising through the ranks based on his analytical brilliance and absolute loyalty to Marion's vision. "Sandra mentioned you were delayed in Denver," Marcus said without preamble. "The San Francisco meeting is critical for the renewable energy deal. Should I reschedule with the investors?" "Not yet," Marion replied, "but I want you to pull our files on Denver International Airport. Corporate partnerships, bond holdings, service contracts, construction financing, everything." There was a pause on the line as Marcus processed the request. When Marion asked for comprehensive financial intelligence on a major institution, it usually meant someone had made a serious mistake. "How comprehensive?" he asked. "I want to know every dollar of leverage we have with this airport authority, every board connection, every regulatory relationship. Full portfolio analysis within 2 hours." "Understood. Anything else?" "Contact Jennifer Walsh at Peterson Kowalski and Associates. Tell her I need a discrimination law specialist available for consultation today. High priority." Marcus had worked with Marion long enough to recognize the controlled fury beneath her professional requests. Someone had clearly crossed a line that shouldn't have been crossed, and the consequences were about to be systematic and devastating. "I'll handle both requests immediately," he confirmed before ending the call. Meanwhile, back in the Platinum Executive Lounge, Thomas Hendricks was beginning to experience doubt about his decision to eject the passenger claiming to be from Blackwell Industries. His attempts to verify her corporate authorization had led to increasingly complex phone trees and automated systems that seemed designed to protect high-level executives from casual inquiries. Rebecca remained confident in their handling of the situation, convinced that they had prevented potential fraud or security breach. But James had spent the morning researching Blackwell Industries online, discovering a company with massive revenues, international operations, and a notably private leadership structure. "Sir," James approached Thomas's desk carefully, "I've been looking into Blackwell Industries, and there are some things you should know." Quote. Thomas looked up from his morning reports, still feeling vaguely unsettled about the passenger ejection. "What did you find?" "The company is much larger than we initially thought. Their annual revenue is in the billions, and they have major holdings in infrastructure development, including airport financing. The CEO and founder is listed as M. Blackwell, but there are very few public photos or detailed biographical information." Thomas felt a cold sensation in his stomach. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything specific, but the passenger we turned away this morning was traveling under the name M. Blackwell, and she seemed unusually calm about being denied access. Most people in her situation would have been angry or demanded to speak with higher management." "She did ask to speak with supervisors," Thomas recalled. "But when you refused, she didn't escalate. She just accepted the rejection and left. That's not typical passenger behavior." Rebecca overheard the conversation and joined them at Thomas's desk. "You're both overthinking this situation. The passenger didn't look like she belonged in our lounge, she couldn't provide adequate verification of her corporate role, and her behavior was suspicious. We made the right decision." But Thomas was now fully engaged with the unsettling possibilities James had raised. "What kind of infrastructure holdings does Blackwell Industries have?" James consulted his tablet. "Airport development, transportation infrastructure, public-private partnerships for terminal construction. They've been involved in major projects at airports across the country." "Including Denver International?" "I'm still researching that, but given their portfolio focus, it would be likely." Thomas reached for his phone, suddenly motivated to conduct more thorough verification of the morning's events. If there was even a small possibility that they had ejected a legitimate high-value passenger, the consequences could be severe for all three of them. His first call went to the Airport Authority's Passenger Relations Department, where he hoped to find additional resources for verifying corporate travelers. The conversation was brief and unhelpful. Passenger relations dealt with complaints and service recovery, not proactive verification of executive identities. His second call went to the security office, where he explained the morning's situation and asked about protocols for handling suspicious passengers with seemingly legitimate documentation. The security supervisor listened carefully, then asked a question that made Thomas's blood pressure spike. Did the passenger make any threats or demonstrate aggressive behavior? No, she was actually quite calm throughout the entire interaction. And the documentation was legitimate? It appeared to be yes. Then why was she denied access? Thomas struggled to articulate his reasoning without admitting that the decision had been based primarily on appearance and assumptions rather than concrete security concerns. There were irregularities with the corporate account verification, he said finally. What kind of irregularities? We couldn't immediately reach someone at her company to confirm her authorization. The security supervisor paused. That's not typically grounds for denying access if the primary documentation is valid. Most corporate accounts have automated verification systems specifically to avoid these kinds of delays. Thomas ended the call feeling significantly worse about the morning's decisions. The security department's response suggested that standard protocols had not been followed, opening the airport to potential discrimination complaints and service failures. Back in the main terminal, Marion received a return call from Marcus Chen with preliminary information about Blackwell Industries' relationship with Denver International Airport. The findings were extensive and troubling for anyone who had crossed her interests. We hold approximately $200 million in airport development bonds, Marcus reported. We're also the primary technology contractor for their reservation systems, ground transportation coordination, and several terminal automation projects. Total annual contract value is roughly $50 million. What about board connections? 3 members of the Airport Authority Board have direct business relationships with our subsidiaries. Another 2 have significant investments in projects we financed. Marion smiled grimly. The web of financial relationships was even more comprehensive than she had expected. Denver International Airport wasn't just a location where she had experienced discrimination. It was an institution whose operational funding significantly depended on her continued cooperation and investment. Prepare a comprehensive analysis for the legal team, she instructed. I want them to understand exactly how much leverage we have before we begin formal proceedings. As the morning progressed toward 10 a.m., the various players in the developing crisis continued their activities, unaware that they were moving toward a confrontation that would reshape not just individual careers, but the entire operational culture of one of America's busiest airports. The quiet woman in casual clothes sitting in the main terminal held more power over their futures than any of them could possibly imagine. At 10:17 a.m., exactly 90 minutes after her initial approach to the Platinum Executive Lounge reception desk, Marion Blackwell received a call that would transform her morning from personal inconvenience into corporate warfare. The caller was Jennifer Walsh, senior partner at Peterson Kowalski & Associates, one of Denver's most prestigious civil rights law firms. Ms. Blackwell, I've reviewed the preliminary information your COO provided about this morning's incident, Jennifer began, her voice carrying the controlled intensity of an attorney who sensed a landmark case developing. Based on the documentation and witness statements, we have grounds for a substantial discrimination lawsuit against the airport authority. I'm less interested in lawsuits than I am in systematic change, Marion replied, though her tone suggested that legal action remained a viable option. Sometimes systematic change requires the kind of financial consequences that capture institutional attention, Jennifer observed. What outcome are you seeking? Marion paused, watching through the terminal windows as ground crews serviced aircraft on the tarmac. Each plane represented thousands of passengers who moved through Denver International daily, many of them potentially subject to the same discriminatory treatment she had experienced. I want accountability that prevents this from happening to anyone else, she said finally. But first, I want to understand how deep the problem goes. While Marion strategized with her legal counsel, the situation inside the Platinum Executive Lounge was deteriorating rapidly. Thomas Hendricks had spent the past hour making increasingly desperate phone calls, trying to verify information about Blackwell Industries and their ejected passenger. Each conversation had revealed more troubling details about the company's scope and influence. His most recent call had been to Patricia Vance, Director of Corporate Relations for Denver International Airport. Patricia oversaw relationships with major business partners, and her reaction to Thomas's inquiry about Blackwell Industries had been immediate and alarming. Thomas, please tell me you didn't have any negative interactions with anyone from Blackwell Industries this morning, Patricia had said, her voice tight with concern. We had a passenger claiming to represent the company, but there were verification issues. What kind of verification issues? Patricia interrupted. The passenger didn't match our typical profile for private jet travelers, and we couldn't immediately confirm her corporate authorization. The silence on the line had stretched for nearly 10 seconds before Patricia responded. Blackwell Industries holds over $200 million in airport development bonds. They're one of our largest technology contractors and maintain significant influence with our board of directors. If you denied service to one of their representatives based on appearance rather than documentation, we could be facing a catastrophic legal and financial situation. Thomas had ended that call feeling physically ill, and his condition hadn't improved as additional information continued to surface. James had discovered that M. Blackwell, the company's founder and CEO, was indeed a black woman whose public profile was intentionally minimal to protect her privacy and security. "Sir," James approached Thomas's desk with obvious reluctance, "I found some additional information about the passenger we ejected this morning." Thomas looked up from his computer screen, where he had been reviewing airport policies on discrimination and customer service protocols. His morning research had revealed that their treatment of the Blackwell Industries passenger had violated at least 6 different internal guidelines. "What did you find?" "There are some industry publications that mention M. Blackwell in connection with airport infrastructure projects. The descriptions match the physical appearance of the passenger we turned away, an African-American woman, approximately 40 years old, known for maintaining a low public profile despite significant wealth." Rebecca, who had been monitoring the conversation from her position at the reception desk, finally abandoned her defensive stance and joined them. The morning's confident assertion that they had prevented fraud was crumbling under the weight of mounting evidence. "Are you saying we actually ejected the CEO of Blackwell Industries?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm saying that's increasingly likely," James replied. Thomas reached for his phone again, this time dialing the direct number from Michael Harrison, Denver International's airport director. If they were facing a discrimination lawsuit from a major corporate partner, Harrison needed to know immediately. The call went directly to voicemail. Thomas left a message requesting urgent callback regarding a potential service issue with Blackwell Industries, then tried Harrison's assistant, who informed him that the airport director was in meetings until after lunch. Meanwhile, word of the morning's incident had begun spreading through the airport's management structure. Patricia Vance had immediately contacted the legal department, which had initiated preliminary research into discrimination liability and corporate partnership implications. The legal team's initial assessment was grimly straightforward. If Blackwell Industries chose to pursue legal action, the airport faced potential damages in the tens of millions. At 10:32 a.m., Marianne received another call from Marcus Chen, this time with information that would escalate the situation beyond personal discrimination into institutional crisis. "I've completed the comprehensive analysis you requested," Marcus reported. "Our financial relationship with Denver International is even more extensive than initially calculated. Beyond the bonds and service contracts, we're also involved in their upcoming terminal expansion project, which represents approximately $800 million in construction financing." "What happens to those projects if we withdraw our participation?" Marianne asked. "The terminal expansion would be delayed by at least 18 months while they secure alternative financing. Several ongoing technology contracts would need to be rebid at significantly higher costs. The economic impact on the airport would be substantial." Marianne absorbed this information while observing the busy terminal around her. Thousands of travelers moved through the concourses, unaware that the discrimination experienced by one passenger that morning could potentially disrupt the airport's multi-billion-dollar expansion plans. "Prepare withdrawal documentation for all discretionary contracts," she instructed. "Don't file anything yet, but I want the option available." "Understood. Should I also prepare statements for our board members who serve on airport authority committees?" "Yes, but keep everything confidential until I decide how to proceed." As Marcus handled the corporate preparation, Marianne decided it was time to take direct action. She had spent over an hour documenting the incident and researching her options. Now she wanted to see if the airport's management was capable of addressing the situation appropriately when given the opportunity. She walked back toward the elevator that led to the Platinum Executive Lounge, her worn leather messenger bag slung over her shoulder, and her expression calm but determined. This time, however, she wasn't seeking lounge access. She was providing the airport authority with one final opportunity to acknowledge their mistake and implement meaningful corrections. The elevator ride to the executive level felt different now. 2 hours earlier, she had been a passenger seeking basic courtesy and service. Now she was a corporate partner testing whether Denver International Airport understood the consequences of institutional discrimination. When the elevator doors opened, she saw immediate evidence that the situation had changed. Thomas Hendricks was pacing near the reception area, his phone pressed to his ear, and his expression showing considerable stress. Rebecca stood at her desk reviewing paperwork with obvious anxiety, while James monitored incoming passengers with nervous efficiency. Thomas ended his phone call and looked up to see Marion approaching. His face went pale as he realized that the passenger they had ejected was voluntarily returning to the scene of the morning's discrimination. "Miss Blackwell," he said, his voice careful and formal, "I was hoping to speak with you." "I'm here to give you that opportunity," Marion replied evenly. "Perhaps we could discuss this situation in my office," Thomas suggested, gesturing toward a private area behind the reception desk. "I prefer to handle this matter publicly, since the discrimination occurred in full view of other passengers and staff members." Thomas glanced around the reception area, noting that several passengers and employees were within hearing range. The prospect of discussing discrimination allegations in such a visible setting made him deeply uncomfortable, but he sensed that refusing Marion's preference would only worsen an already critical situation. "I want to apologize for any confusion or inconvenience you experienced this morning," Thomas began, his words carefully chosen to acknowledge problems without admitting legal liability. "Confusion suggests misunderstanding," Marion replied calmly. "What happened this morning was systematic discrimination based on assumptions about my appearance and my right to access services I was authorized to use." The directness of her statement created uncomfortable silence in the reception area. Other passengers glanced over, sensing tension in the usually serene executive environment. Staff members slowed their activities to listen more carefully to the unfolding confrontation. "Our staff follows standard verification procedures," Thomas started. "Your staff follows different verification procedures for different passengers," Marion interrupted. "I observed wealthy white passengers receive immediate access with minimal documentation review, while I was subjected to extended interrogation and ultimately ejected despite providing valid credentials." Rebecca stepped forward, perhaps hoping to salvage the situation through direct engagement. "Ma'am, we were simply following security protocols designed to protect all passengers." Marion turned her attention to Rebecca, her gaze steady and unforgiving. "You told other staff members that I didn't look like I belonged in spaces reserved for private jet passengers. You questioned whether someone of my appearance could afford $40,000 aircraft charters. Those comments had nothing to do with security and everything to do with racial bias." The accusations hung in the air like indictments, each word carefully chosen for maximum legal and emotional impact. Thomas realized that Marion had not returned to seek apologies or accommodations. She had returned to create an official record of the discrimination and the airport's response to her allegations. "We certainly never intended any form of discrimination," Thomas began. "Intent is less relevant than impact," Marion replied. "Your actions this morning violated federal civil rights laws, your own corporate policies, and basic standards of human dignity. The question now is whether this institution is capable of meaningful accountability or whether external intervention will be necessary." The confrontation had shifted from customer service recovery to legal proceeding, with Thomas and his staff effectively on trial in their own workplace. Marion's calm presentation of facts and legal implications demonstrated a level of sophisticated understanding that made it clear she was not just another disgruntled passenger seeking compensation or apologies. As the tension reached its peak, Marion delivered her final statement. "You have exactly 22 minutes to determine how you want this situation resolved. After that point, the matter will be handled through channels that are significantly less convenient for everyone involved." She checked her watch with deliberate precision, then stood perfectly still, waiting to see if Denver International Airport would choose accountability or denial in the face of consequences that were about to reshape their entire operational future. The 22-minute countdown had begun, and Thomas Hendricks felt each second pressing against him like physical weight. He excused himself from the reception area and retreated to his office, frantically dialing every contact number he could find for Denver International's senior leadership. The morning had transformed from routine operations management into a career-threatening crisis, and he was running out of time to find someone with authority to address the situation. His first successful connection was with David Kozloff, Deputy Director of Airport Operations, who answered on the fourth ring while attending a budget meeting in the administrative tower. "David, I need immediate assistance with a discrimination incident in the Platinum Executive Lounge," Thomas said without preamble. "We're facing potential legal action from Blackwell Industries, and I have reason to believe we ejected their CEO this morning." The silence on the line stretched for several seconds before David responded. Please tell me you're calling to report that someone else ejected a Blackwell Industries executive, not that you personally were involved. I was directly involved, along with my reception staff. The passenger didn't match our typical profile expectations, and our verification procedures led to her being denied access. Thomas, Blackwell Industries represents approximately $300 million in annual airport relationships. Their CEO, Marion Blackwell, is one of the most influential business leaders in Colorado. If you discriminated against her based on appearance assumptions, we're not just facing a lawsuit. We're facing the potential loss of contracts that keep this airport financially viable. Thomas felt his stomach drop further as the financial implications became clearer. She's given us 22 minutes to resolve this situation before she pursues external remedies. Where is she now? Standing in our reception area, waiting for a response. David's voice became sharp with urgency. Do not let her leave. Do not say anything else that could be construed as discriminatory. I'm calling Michael Harrison immediately and heading to your location. Keep her there until I arrive. Meanwhile, in the reception area, Marion stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the tarmac, her posture relaxed but her attention focused on the activity around her. Rebecca and James whispered anxiously at the reception desk, clearly aware that their morning's decisions were unraveling in real time. Other passengers continued to arrive and depart, but the atmosphere in the lounge had shifted dramatically. Word was spreading through the staff that the woman they had ejected was someone of significant importance, though the exact details remained unclear to most employees. At 10:47 a.m., Marion's phone buzzed with a call from Sandra Martinez, her assistant in San Francisco. The board meeting has been moved to 2 p.m. Pacific to accommodate your delay, Sandra reported. However, the renewable energy investors are becoming concerned about the schedule changes. Should I provide them with an explanation? Tell them there's been an institutional matter requiring my immediate attention, but that I expect to resolve it within the next 15 minutes, Marion replied, her voice carrying quiet confidence about the timing. Understood. Marcus also asked me to inform you that the withdrawal documentation is prepared and can be filed within minutes of your authorization. Marion glanced at her watch. 14 minutes remaining in her ultimatum. The airport's leadership had 800 seconds to demonstrate their commitment to addressing discrimination, or her company would begin terminating contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. At that moment, the elevator doors opened to reveal David Kozlov, a tall man in his 50s, whose usual composed demeanor showed cracks of barely controlled panic. He strode directly toward Marion, his expensive suit and confident bearing marking him as senior management. Ms. Blackwell, I'm David Kozlov, Deputy Director of Airport Operations. I sincerely apologize for the service failure you experienced this morning, and I'm here to ensure we address your concerns immediately. Marion turned from the window to face him, her expression neutral but attentive. What specific steps are you prepared to take to address systematic discrimination in your premium services? David had prepared for requests about compensation, upgraded services, or formal apologies. He hadn't expected to be immediately challenged about institutional policy changes. We take all discrimination allegations seriously and have established procedures for investigating and correcting service failures, he began, falling back on standard corporate language. Your established procedures failed to prevent this morning's incident, Marion observed. Your staff made assumptions about my worthiness for service based on my appearance, subjected me to interrogation that other passengers didn't experience, and ultimately ejected me from facilities I was authorized to use. Standard procedures are clearly inadequate. David glanced around the reception area, noting that their conversation was being observed by passengers, staff members, and airport security personnel who had begun gathering as word of the situation spread. The public nature of the discussion was making damage control significantly more difficult. Perhaps we could continue this conversation in a private conference room where we can discuss comprehensive solutions, David suggested. The discrimination occurred publicly, so the accountability should be public as well, Marion replied. But I'm willing to discuss specific remedies if you're prepared to implement them immediately. David looked toward Thomas, who had emerged from his office and was standing nearby with obvious anxiety. The next few minutes would determine whether the situation could be contained through internal resolution or would escalate to external legal and regulatory action. What remedies are you seeking? David asked. Marion consulted her watch again. 11 minutes remaining. She had spent the countdown period observing how the airport's management responded to the crisis, and their approach had been predictably focused on damage control rather than genuine accountability. First, immediate termination of the employees who engaged in discriminatory behavior this morning. Second, mandatory bias training for all customer-facing staff in premium services. Third, establishment of an external oversight committee to monitor discrimination complaints and ensure appropriate responses. Fourth, public acknowledgement of this incident and commitment to preventing similar occurrences. The demands were comprehensive and non-negotiable, delivered with the precision of someone who had anticipated exactly this conversation. David realized that Marion Blackwell had not returned to the lounge seeking apologies or compensation. She had returned to implement systematic change. Those are significant organizational changes that would require approval from our airport director and potentially our board of commissioners, David replied, stalling for time while he processed the implications. Then you should contact them immediately, Marion said simply. You have approximately 10 minutes to secure those approvals. At that moment, Michael Harrison, the airport director, arrived via the executive elevator. His presence immediately commanded attention from everyone in the reception area. Harrison was a veteran aviation administrator whose career had been built on managing complex stakeholder relationships and avoiding public relations disasters. Ms. Blackwell, Harrison said, extending his hand in greeting. I'm Michael Harrison, and I want to personally apologize for the unacceptable treatment you received this morning. Marion shook his hand briefly, but didn't return his conciliatory smile. Apologies are insufficient when discrimination is systematic rather than accidental. Harrison had been briefed during his elevator ride about the financial implications of the situation. Blackwell Industries' involvement in airport operations extended far beyond simple passenger services, and losing their corporate partnership would create budgetary disasters that could take years to resolve. I understand you're seeking comprehensive changes to prevent similar incidents, Harrison said. I'm prepared to authorize immediate implementation of new policies and procedures. Which specific policies? Marion pressed. Harrison looked toward David and Thomas, neither of whom had been able to provide detailed remediation plans in the brief time since the crisis had escalated to his attention. We'll establish a passenger rights ombudsman position, implement quarterly bias training for all staff, and create new protocols for verifying passenger credentials without discriminatory profiling, Harrison offered, improvising solutions as he spoke. Marion listened to his proposals with the expression of someone evaluating a business presentation. Her silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds as she considered whether the airport's leadership was demonstrating genuine commitment to change or simply offering temporary concessions to avoid immediate consequences. Those measures address symptoms rather than causes, she finally replied. The fundamental issue is that your staff felt comfortable making discriminatory decisions because they believed there would be no meaningful consequences for their actions. She paused, checking her watch again. 6 minutes remaining. Your employees were confident that they could eject a black passenger based on appearance assumptions because they operate within a culture that tolerates and rewards such discrimination. Policy changes without accountability are merely performative. Harrison felt the weight of her analysis and realized that conventional damage control strategies would be insufficient for this situation. Marion Blackwell was not seeking to be bought off or appeased. She was demanding institutional transformation. What would constitute meaningful accountability, in your view? Harrison asked. The immediate termination of Thomas Hendricks and Rebecca Morrison for engaging in discriminatory behavior, public acknowledgement of the discrimination and commitment to preventing recurrence, establishment of an independent monitoring system with external oversight, and personal guarantees from airport leadership that similar incidents will result in senior management consequences. The demands landed like legal documents, precise and non-negotiable. Harrison understood that he was not negotiating with an angry passenger. He was being presented with an ultimatum by one of the airport's most important corporate partners. Thomas stepped forward, his face pale but his voice steady. Ms. Blackwell, I take full responsibility for this morning's decisions. If my termination would help resolve this situation and prevent similar incidents, I'm prepared to accept that consequence. His unexpected willingness to sacrifice his career for the institution's survival created a moment of surprised silence in the reception area. Rebecca looked stricken as she realized that Thomas's gesture of accountability might not protect her from similar consequences. Marion regarded Thomas with something that might have been respect. Personal accountability is commendable but insufficient without systematic change. She checked her watch one final time, 2 minutes remaining. You have 90 seconds to provide binding commitments for the comprehensive changes I've outlined, or this matter will be resolved through external channels that are significantly less convenient for everyone involved. The countdown had reached its critical moment, and Denver International Airport's leadership faced a choice that would determine not just their immediate futures, but the institutional culture that would define their operations for years to come. With 90 seconds remaining on Marion's ultimatum, Michael Harrison made the decision that would define his legacy as airport director. He pulled out his phone and placed a conference call to the 5-member Denver International Airport Board of Commissioners. Knowing that their next few minutes of conversation would either save or destroy careers, contracts, and institutional credibility. "This is Michael Harrison with an emergency board consultation," he announced as the commissioners joined the call. "We have a Code Red discrimination incident involving Blackwell Industries, and I need immediate authorization to implement comprehensive remediation measures." Board Chair Margaret Williamson's voice came through the speaker with sharp concern. "What's the financial exposure, Michael?" "Potential loss of $300 million in annual contracts, plus discrimination lawsuit damages that could reach tens of millions. We're also facing possible delays to the $800 million terminal expansion if Blackwell Industries withdraws their financing participation." The financial numbers created immediate silence on the conference line as the commissioners absorbed the magnitude of the crisis. Marion watched Harrison conduct this emergency consultation while maintaining her own calm composure, checking her watch as precious seconds continued to expire. "What specific commitments are you seeking authorization to make?" asked Commissioner Robert Chen, the board's legal counsel. Harrison quickly outlined Marion's demands: immediate terminations, systematic bias training, external oversight, and public accountability measures. Each requirement represented significant operational and financial commitments that would reshape how the airport managed premium services. "The affected passenger is standing here waiting for our response," Harrison added. "We have approximately 60 seconds to provide binding commitments or face external legal and regulatory action." Commissioner Sarah Davis, who oversaw airport operations, spoke next. "Is the passenger demanding financial compensation?" "No," Harrison replied, glancing toward Marion. "She's demanding institutional change to prevent future discrimination incidents." This information surprised the commissioners, who were accustomed to discrimination complaints seeking monetary settlements rather than systematic transformation. The scope of Marion's demands suggested someone with deeper motivations than typical passenger grievances. "Authorize whatever commitments are necessary to resolve this situation immediately," Margaret Williamson declared. "We cannot afford to lose Blackwell Industries as a corporate partner, and we certainly cannot afford a public discrimination scandal." With 30 seconds remaining, Harrison ended the conference call and turned to face Marion directly. "Ms. Blackwell, on behalf of Denver International Airport and with full authorization from our Board of Commissioners, I am prepared to implement the comprehensive changes you've outlined, effective immediately." "Specifically?" Marion prompted. "Thomas Hendricks and Rebecca Morrison will be terminated today for engaging in discriminatory behavior. All premium service staff will complete mandatory bias training within 30 days. We'll establish an independent passenger rights ombudsman position with external oversight authority. And I will personally issue a public statement acknowledging this incident and our commitment to preventing similar occurrences." Marion listened to each commitment, evaluating whether the airport's leadership understood the seriousness of institutional change versus temporary crisis management. "Timeline for implementation?" she asked. "Terminations effective today. Bias training program operational within 2 weeks. Ombudsman position filled within 30 days. Public statement issued within 24 hours. External oversight component. We'll engage an independent civil rights organization to monitor our progress and validate our compliance with anti-discrimination policies." Marion checked her watch. 10 seconds remaining. The airport's leadership had provided comprehensive commitments within her deadline. But the real test would be whether those commitments translated into lasting cultural change. "Acceptable," she said simply. "I'll expect written documentation of these commitments within 4 hours, along with implementation timelines and measurable accountability metrics." The collective exhale from Harrison, David, and Thomas was audible as the immediate crisis moved from ultimatum to resolution phase. However, Marion's acceptance of their terms came with the understanding that her company would be monitoring compliance closely. Thomas stepped forward once more, his resignation already mentally prepared. "Ms. Blackwell, I want to personally apologize for my role in this morning's discrimination. I allowed assumptions and biases to override professional judgment, and I accept full responsibility for the consequences." His words carried genuine remorse rather than strategic damage control, and Marion recognized the difference. "Personal accountability is the foundation of institutional change," she replied. "I hope your experience today prevents others from making similar mistakes." Rebecca, who had remained silent during the executive confrontations, finally approached Marion with obvious difficulty. "Ma'am, I realize that apologies can't undo what happened this morning, but I want you to know that I never intended to discriminate against anyone." "Impact matters more than intent," Marion responded, her tone neither harsh nor forgiving. "The training programs being implemented will help you understand how unconscious bias creates discriminatory outcomes, even when discrimination isn't consciously intended." James, the junior staff member who had shown discomfort with the morning's events, was exempted from termination but would participate in the expanded training programs. His willingness to question discriminatory procedures had demonstrated the kind of ethical awareness that could help prevent future incidents. As the immediate accountability measures were being finalized, Patricia Vance arrived from the Corporate Relations Office with a comprehensive briefing about Blackwell Industries' importance to airport operations. Her research had revealed contract details that made the morning's discrimination even more financially catastrophic than initially calculated. "Ms. Blackwell," Patricia said, "I want to assure you that our corporate partnership will not be affected by this morning's service failure. We value our relationship with Blackwell Industries and are committed to ensuring that your future airport experiences meet the highest standards of professional courtesy. The corporate relationship will be evaluated based on institutional performance, not individual assurances," Marion replied diplomatically. "Sustained change will determine whether our business partnership continues." Her response made it clear that Blackwell Industries' hundreds of millions in airport contracts remained contingent on demonstrated progress in addressing discrimination. The financial leverage would persist until cultural transformation was complete and verifiable. David Kozlov, who had coordinated much of the crisis response, asked about immediate operational changes. "Are there specific procedural modifications you'd recommend for our premium services to prevent similar incidents?" Marion considered the question carefully. She had spent the morning observing not just her own discriminatory treatment, but the broader patterns of assumption and bias that affected multiple passengers. "Implement blind verification systems that focus on documentation rather than appearance," she suggested. "Train staff to recognize when their comfort level with passengers correlates with racial or economic assumptions. And create reporting mechanisms that protect employees who witness discrimination from retaliation when they speak up." These recommendations went beyond addressing her specific experience to tackle the systematic issues that enabled discrimination throughout the airport's operations. James nodded as she spoke, recognizing the behavioral patterns he had observed but felt powerless to challenge. At 11:15 a.m., exactly 28 minutes after Marion's ultimatum had begun, the immediate crisis was resolved through institutional accountability rather than individual compensation. However, the broader work of cultural transformation was just beginning. Michael Harrison coordinated with his communications team to draft the public statement acknowledging the discrimination incident. The message would need to balance transparency about the airport's failures with confidence in their commitment to change, all while maintaining the professional relationships that kept Denver International financially viable. Meanwhile, Marion finally accessed the Platinum Executive Lounge amenities she had originally sought that morning. The irony was not lost on anyone present that she now sat in luxury seating as the owner of contracts worth hundreds of millions, rather than as the anonymous passenger who had been ejected hours earlier. Her phone buzzed with updates from Marcus Chen about the status of contract withdrawal preparations. "Should I cancel the termination documentation?" he asked. "Keep it available but don't file," Marion replied. "We'll monitor implementation progress before making final decisions about our airport partnerships." As the morning's crisis moved into resolution phase, word began spreading throughout Denver International's management structure. The discrimination incident and its consequences became a case study in how quickly institutional bias could create corporate disasters, and how expensive it could be to address discrimination reactively rather than proactively. Thomas Hendricks cleared out his office while reflecting on how assumptions about passenger appearance had destroyed his career in luxury hospitality. Rebecca Morrison faced similar consequences, though her termination came with eligibility for the bias training programs that might help her understand the discriminatory impact of her actions. The broader airport staff began receiving notifications about mandatory training sessions, policy updates, and new accountability measures. Some employees welcomed the changes as overdue corrections to long-standing problems, while others grumbled about additional requirements and oversight. By noon, Marion was boarding her delayed Gulfstream G650 for the flight to San Francisco, her morning's work complete but her monitoring of institutional change just beginning. The quiet woman in casual clothes who had been ejected from the lounge was departing as the corporate leader whose influence would reshape airport operations for years to come. Captain Reynolds, who had waited patiently for his passenger during the morning's crisis, greeted her with professional courtesy that contrasted sharply with her earlier treatment. "Ready for departure, Ms. Blackwell?" "Ready," she confirmed, settling into the aircraft's luxury seating while reviewing the written commitments that Michael Harrison had delivered as promised. As the jet lifted off from Denver International, Marion looked down at the airport complex that would soon implement the most comprehensive anti-discrimination program in American aviation. The morning's humiliation had been transformed into institutional accountability, proving that dignity and justice were not just personal values but corporate imperatives. The consequences were far from over. They were just beginning to reshape an entire airport's culture, one policy change at a time. 6 months after the discrimination incident that nearly cost Denver International Airport its most valuable corporate partnership, the institutional transformation was visible throughout every level of airport operations. The changes had rippled far beyond the Platinum Executive Lounge, creating new standards for equity and accountability that other airports across the nation were beginning to adopt. Dr. Angela Rodriguez, the newly appointed passenger rights ombudsman, reviewed her quarterly report while sitting in an office that hadn't existed before Marion Blackwell's 22-minute ultimatum. Her independent oversight role had processed over 300 discrimination complaints in 6 months, implementing swift resolutions and systematic corrections that prevented incidents from escalating to legal action. "The cultural shift has been remarkable," Dr. Rodriguez explained during her presentation to the Airport Board of Commissioners. Staff members now actively intervene when they witness potentially discriminatory behavior, rather than remaining silent. The reporting mechanisms have created accountability at every operational level. Her data showed dramatic improvements in passenger satisfaction scores, particularly among travelers from historically marginalized communities. Complaints about discriminatory treatment had decreased by 87%, while staff confidence in handling diverse passenger needs had increased significantly through comprehensive bias training programs. Margaret Williamson, the board chair, had initially viewed the discrimination incident as a crisis to be managed. Now she recognized it as a transformation opportunity that had strengthened the airport's reputation and operational effectiveness. "Dr. Rodriguez, what feedback have we received from other airports about our new policies?" Margaret asked. 15 major airports have contacted us requesting consultation on implementing similar programs. The Federal Aviation Administration has cited our passenger rights framework as a model for national adoption. We've essentially become a case study in proactive discrimination prevention. The success metrics extended beyond customer service improvements. Employee retention rates had increased as staff members felt more confident and supported in their roles. Training programs had evolved from mandatory compliance exercises into ongoing professional development opportunities that enhanced career advancement prospects. James Patterson, the former junior staff member who had witnessed the original discrimination incident, now served as a peer training coordinator. His role involved helping new employees understand how unconscious bias could influence passenger interactions, drawing from his personal experience observing discriminatory practices. "I remember feeling uncomfortable about how Ms. Blackwell was being treated, but I didn't know how to speak up without risking my job," James explained to a new employee orientation group. "Now we have clear protocols for reporting concerns and supporting colleagues who witness inappropriate behavior." His story had become part of the standard training curriculum, demonstrating how institutional change could empower employees to act on their ethical instincts rather than remaining silent witnesses to discrimination. Meanwhile, the broader impact of the incident continued expanding through Marion Blackwell's corporate influence. Blackwell Industries had developed a vendor certification program that required business partners to demonstrate commitment to anti-discrimination policies and practices. The program had influenced hundreds of companies across multiple industries, creating ripple effects far beyond aviation. Marcus Chen, still serving as Chief Operating Officer, had overseen the implementation of these expanded corporate social responsibility initiatives. Ms. Blackwell's experience at Denver International catalyzed changes that we'd been considering for years, he explained during a corporate board meeting. Sometimes personal experience provides the momentum needed to implement systematic improvements. The terminal expansion project that had been threatened during the crisis was now proceeding ahead of schedule, with Blackwell Industries' continued participation ensuring both financial stability and adherence to the highest ethical standards. The construction workforce reflected unprecedented diversity, and the new terminal design incorporated accessibility features that exceeded federal requirements. Thomas Hendricks, the former operations manager whose career had ended due to his discriminatory actions, had spent the months since his termination in intensive bias training and community service with civil rights organizations. His personal transformation journey had become another component of the airport's educational programs, demonstrating that individuals could learn from serious mistakes and contribute to positive change. I had to confront the uncomfortable reality that my assumptions about who belonged in elite spaces were rooted in racial bias, Thomas shared during a diversity training session for hospitality managers. Professional success had made me comfortable with exclusion, and it took losing my career to understand how destructive that comfort had become. His willingness to accept accountability and engage in personal growth had eventually led to employment with a non-profit organization focused on bias reduction in service industries. His lived experience with the consequences of discrimination made him an effective advocate for institutional change. Rebecca Morrison had initially resisted the bias training requirements, maintaining that her actions had been based on security concerns rather than racial assumptions. However, as the training progressed and she encountered perspectives from passengers who had experienced similar treatment, her understanding evolved significantly. I realized now that I was using security protocols as justification for discriminatory instincts, Rebecca admitted during her final training session. The policies existed, but I was applying them selectively based on unconscious biases I hadn't acknowledged. Quote, her journey toward awareness had been more difficult than Thomas's, but equally important for demonstrating that change was possible even for individuals who initially denied their discriminatory behavior. The public statement that Michael Harrison had issued within 24 hours of the incident had become a template for institutional accountability. Rather than minimizing the discrimination or offering vague promises of improvement, the statement had specifically acknowledged the airport's failures and provided concrete commitments with measurable timelines. We failed Ms. Blackwell and countless other passengers by allowing discriminatory assumptions to influence our service delivery, the statement had read. These failures reflect systematic problems that require systematic solutions, and we are committed to implementing changes that will prevent similar treatment of any passenger in the future. The transparency had initially generated criticism and negative publicity, but had ultimately enhanced the airport's reputation for ethical leadership and accountability. Other institutions facing discrimination complaints now study Denver International's response as an example of effective crisis management through authentic change rather than defensive public relations. A year after the incident, Marion Blackwell returned to Denver International Airport for the first time since her discriminatory ejection from the Platinum Executive Lounge. Her visit was announced in advance, with Dr. Rodriguez and Michael Harrison personally ensuring that her experience reflected the institutional transformation that had occurred. She was greeted at the executive level by James Patterson, now promoted to Passenger Experience Coordinator, whose professional growth embodied the airport's commitment to empowering ethical leadership at every operational level. Ms. Blackwell, welcome back to Denver International, James said warmly. I want to personally thank you for the courage you showed in demanding accountability. The changes you initiated have made this a better place to work and travel. The Platinum Executive Lounge now displayed a passenger rights charter prominently in the reception area, outlining specific commitments to equitable treatment and providing clear channels for addressing service concerns. The staff members who greeted Marion were trained in bias recognition and equipped with protocols that prioritize documentation over assumptions. During her visit, Marion met with Dr. Rodriguez to review the Ombudsman program's effectiveness and discuss potential enhancements. Their conversation revealed how individual acts of courage could catalyze institutional transformation that benefits countless people who would never know the original catalyst for change. The discrimination you experienced was unconscionable, Dr. Rodriguez observed, but your response has prevented similar treatment for thousands of passengers who will never know they were protected by your willingness to demand justice. Marion's approach to the crisis had demonstrated that sustainable change required more than legal action or financial compensation. It required institutional leaders who understood that dignity and respect were not negotiable aspects of customer service, regardless of passenger appearance or perceived status. The broader aviation industry had taken notice of Denver International's transformation. The Airport Council International had invited Marion to keynote their annual conference on diversity and inclusion, recognizing her role in advancing equity standards throughout the industry. Discrimination thrives in environments where people believe they can make assumptions about others without consequences, Marion told the audience of airport executives and government officials. Change occurs when institutions choose accountability over defensiveness, and when leaders understand that diversity is not just morally imperative but operationally essential. Her speech had inspired similar initiatives at airports worldwide, creating a global movement toward more equitable passenger services. The 22 minutes that had nearly destroyed careers and contracts had ultimately generated positive change for millions of travelers who would benefit from enhanced anti-discrimination protections. As Marion's return visit to Denver International concluded, she reflected on how individual dignity and institutional accountability were interconnected. Her experience had transformed personal humiliation into systematic improvement, proving that justice could emerge from injustice when people chose courage over comfort. The quiet woman in casual clothes who had been ejected from an executive lounge had become a catalyst for change that extended far beyond aviation into every industry where assumptions about who belongs in elite spaces could influence treatment and opportunities. Her story demonstrated that progress occurs not through anger or retaliation, but through strategic application of influence and unwavering commitment to dignity for all people. The discrimination she experienced had been unconscionable, but her response had created lasting change that honored both her own worth and the worth of every person who would benefit from the institutional transformation she had demanded. The skies above Denver International Airport carried more than aircraft. They carried the promise that dignity, respect, and justice were not privileges to be earned through appearance or status, but rights to be protected through institutional accountability and personal courage. And that promise would endure long after the specific incident that created it had faded from memory, ensuring that future travelers would benefit from one woman's refusal to accept discrimination as inevitable or acceptable. The transformation was complete, but the commitment to equity was just beginning. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.